Good morning, Trumptopia. Breaking news, friends. That first shoe's finally dropped. An unprecedented historical moment in presidential history. Donald Trump indicted. Don't celebrate too hard too soon. It's just the first shoe. There's another shoe yet to drop. Shoulda, coulda, woulda done this episode yesterday, but I was late on catching up to the news. But the internet is all abuzz with the breaking of the news worldwide. For the first time in American history, a former president will be taken to account for crimes committed. Or will he? Bum, bum, bum. We don't really know quite yet. It ain't over till it's over. And they lock him up in a cell. And there's quite a long road ahead before we get to that moment. Welcome to a mix and match mashup episode of News Breaking News and Good Morning Trumptopia. It is 7:49 a.m. Friday, March 31st, Pacific Standard Time, and I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zebo. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you, Trumptopia, and these grand old United States of America. Welcome to the show, folks. As you've probably heard, for I am not breaking any of the news myself, a grand jury in New York voted to indict the former President Donald J. Trump. Now, as many have astutely pointed out, this indictment represents the lowest of the low-hanging fruit of the, amongst the many fruits on the tree of a legal calamity that Donald Trump has been trying to chop down ever since he exited the White House. I just made up that analogy on the fly. Why, friends? Because this show is real, raw, and radically unscripted, and ain't nobody, and I mean nobody, dictating to me what I will say to you on the air. All opinions, conclusions, observations, theories, and hypotheses are entirely my own, unless I explicitly tell you that I am quoting someone. Let's officially kick off the show with the opening jingle. Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the almost daily ZenCast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump. For many, this has been a day long coming. For others, this is a moral outrage which proves the tyranny of the left is out to destroy all good and wholesomeness. The truth? Probably somewhere in the middle. But for those of you who have not caught up with the news, Donald Trump faces a formal indictment and is scheduled to turn himself in, according to what I've seen floating around on the interwebs, sometime on Tuesday afternoon. We're going to have to tune in for live updates about that. But as things stand now, a sealed indictment has been brought. Of course, some information has been leaked. Apparently, that indictment contains 35 counts of fraudulent business document manipulation or something to that effect. The fraudulent editing and alteration of business documentation. Now, is this a grand slam, a slam dunk? Is this the end-all, be-all of the situation? No way, by any means, friends. Although 23 people, that's how many people sit, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 23. I might be mistaken. It might be 25. But I think it's 23. 23 people on a grand jury after months and months and months and months and months of investigations and the reviewing of information and evidence, have decided unanimously, from what I understand, to recommend the bringing of criminal charges. Now, before we get too excited, there's plenty of work to be done, as he must be brought in, processed, held in stasis, and then, ushered into trial. And then a petite jury of 12 of his peers must vote, I think unanimously, to convict. And that's still a long ways away. And if there's anything we should all now understand about the Don, as he likes to call himself sometimes, is that his number one and number two and number three and number four and number five legal tactic is delay, 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 stall, stall, stall. So it might be quite the winding road ahead. But oh, the irony. I'm savoring the delightful irony of blatant hypocrisy on display. And let everyone be reminded right here and right now that some of us, i.e. myself, me, myself, and I, amongst, I'm sure, many others, were warning the soon-to-be Trumptopian masses, as he announced during the election process and the campaigning, tours. We tried to warn them all that this dude was shady AF, all caps, and a blatant hubris-driven hypocrite, prone to accusing others of exactly what he's doing, exaggerating his abilities, hyper-vilifying all those who disagree with him, stiffing anyone and everyone he can, and scamming his followers for money. And we tried our best to alert them to the problematic issues in getting into the support base for this spray-tanned orange comb-over cartoon of a man. Okay, is that brutally unfair of me? I mean, I don't know. The names I've been called by Trump supporters, I think I can have a little leeway in being a bit saucy in my categorization of this gentleman. But let's be blunt. He has a lifelong track record of flaunting his own criminality and somehow magically never really quite getting brought in to be held to account. There's a reason why he called himself Teflon Don. But this, it seems that perhaps his luck has turned. One thing is for sure, his base is quite enthusiastically now screaming at the top of their lungs about how all of this is tyranny and overreach and oppression, and comparing the Democrats to Pol Pot and others of that ilk. The absurdity, of course, is that throughout the campaign and the election process, and well into his first couple of years in the White House, they all spent quite a bit of time and energy chanting, "Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up," genuinely and enthusiastically believing that Trump could act unilaterally and with total disregard for legal procedure to throw a certain someone in the slammer and throw away the keys. Now, we could have a whole other discussion about whether or not this certain someone deserves to be investigated and exposed for things, and that's another episode. Put a pin on the corkboard, as I have discussed this issue before, and I'm sure I will again. And speaking of redundant statements, I will say this pointedly right here and right now, as I'm sure I will have to say it again, repeatedly. Just because I am daring to question, critique, and occasionally lampoon the great Donald J. Trump does not inherently and automatically or axiomatically mean that I am blindly defending Biden or anyone in the Democratic Party. Pins on the corkboard. For those of you who are confused when I keep saying that, that means subject matter we've referenced before on the podcast during our 6.5, maybe 7 years now of being on the air, and that we will very likely come full circle back around to discuss in a future episode. So there you have it. It is a metaphor. Okay, friends. So there's a lot of hubbub. The internet's on fire. The memes are amazing. Some of them are quite ridiculous. Some of them are a bit beyond the pale. Some of them are kind of duds in the water. But of course, there is a lot of making of hay of how this grand jury indictment is somehow magically being paid for by George Soros or lizard people from another planet, and everything in between that you can imagine, and that it is the most un-American thing to ever happen in America, which is delightfully absurd, given the amount of time, energy, and effort spent by Trump and his most fervent of zealots foaming at the mouth about how they expected him to unilaterally throw not only Clinton but others in the slammer. So many layers, so many things. But I would like to point out that one of the most obnoxious coinky-dinky features of the rough and tumble political theater and seeming mutual complicity between the left and the right is that despite all the argumentation, all the foaming at the mouth, all the clutching of the pearls, and all the diving for the jugulars, they somehow each seem to get away with the things that the other is supposedly striving so hard to stop them from achieving. So, will Trump see the inside of a jail cell? At this point, there are no guarantees. So let us watch this space with bated breath, whilst not being distracted from other things that of equal or even greater importance. But it must be recognized that all cynicism, all conspiracy theory, all malarkey set aside, this is truly an unprecedented moment in presidential history. Now, as some have already quickly pointed out, the supporters and the acolytes and the zealots are already spewing the sort of bland, Fox Newsified talking points in retaliation to this indictment. And at the core is this notion that somehow this indictment is setting an impossible example or precedent, not president, but precedent, for future presidents. But let's be clear, and this is something that, of course, those who are bending over backwards to radically ignore all of Trump's deeply problematic issues and obvious criminal behavior will of course enthusiastically ignore, and that's that the Constitution and the presidency afford a sort of immunity whilst in office, but not afterwards. There's even a whole passage, and I wish I had it in front of me, but I don't because my notepad thing hasn't done the synchronization thing from one platform to the other. And so I had hoped it would by now, but it hasn't. So let me pop it up on this other device. As someone pointed out recently, where is it? And I'm quoting, who am I quoting? I'm quoting economist Robert Reich. Quote, "The framers of the Constitution explicitly provide that presidents could be charged after leaving office. Article 1, Section 3 states that a president impeached by the House and convicted and removed from office by the Senate, quote, shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to the law." End quote. So all of this malarkey is political hubris at its finest, political theater at its best, in terms of all these claims that this is targeted witch huntery, right? And again, something we tried to point out to those who were becoming his enthusiastic fan base during the election cycle was that Trump is well known, notorious for pointing fingers and slinging accusations at others of precisely the kinds of things he is in the middle of doing. And there's a whole long track record We can get into that. We have in previous episodes, and I'm sure we will again. And as the low-hanging fruit, this indictment will hopefully shake things up and bring about further, deeper indictments into the more egregious criminal activities. The thing I've been wondering since day one, and day one was when he rode down the escalator, and just knowing the kind of con artist that he already was, my question has been, emoluments clause? Anyone? And I've asked it repeatedly. Like, how can they not pursue some sort of indictment and criminal charge under the emoluments clause, given all the ways in which he violated the emoluments clause? So there's that, friends. Not to say for certain that I think that that's the highest, the pinnacle of the fruit on the tree, but it's definitely much further up there than this low-hanging fruit of indicting him for attempting to pay hush money and juggling it in a way that was obviously a violation of campaign finance law. Now, the simple reality that Trump has preemptively vilified everyone that has ever investigated him speaks volumes. It's just like how he said before the second election, he said quite preemptively, with much ado, that if he lost, it would only be because they cheated. That's the kind of thing a cheater says. You know, it's hedging your bets. But who knows? As much as I enjoy pointing out the problematic issues with Donald Trump, I am by no means unaware, nor am I ignorant of the problematic issues with the opposition party. In fact, as I like to remind folks whenever they irrationally accuse me of being a leftist, which I categorically am not, I am of the opinion that it seems obvious that at the highest echelons of power, and in the places and the times and on the issues that it matters most, the two parties seem complicit with one another, like Punch and Judy are complicit in the theatrics of the Punch and Judy show. So you'll forgive me if I won't be the least bit surprised that he somehow miraculously pulls out a failure to be convicted card and get out of jail, maybe not for free, card, and manages to evade this. But I will cling to some hope, as this is but the first of what I think may be many indictments. Perhaps, just perhaps, one of them will stick. And then, once all of that hubbub and hoopla is finally over with, we can return to the evaluation of both parties as a whole. That's why I've been focused on questioning and critiquing this mastermind of seven-dimensional checkers, because he is unequivocally and unquestioningly a massive distraction from solving any of the other problems that need to be addressed. Too many things to talk about, never enough time to do it, and I'm already feeling like I am gonna rack my voice into ruination. But friends, let's take a quick breather. Let me play for you some DJ Zed. Remembering the Grooves, an endless trance groove pad, audio entertainment asset, manipulation audio track of literary fictional music from the robot universe and another timeline that you've never heard of before, because I haven't finished writing the books. DJ Zed, take it away. Questions. Here's one that I almost hesitate to give voice to. But whatever happened to the massive Trumptopian revolution and civil war that they saber-rattled and thumped their chests about so hard? Should any law enforcement agency deign to put their filthy monkey paws on dear old Donnie's shoulders? Are they waiting for some special signal from Trump? Are they just lagging because they were so unprepared for this indictment that they didn't think it would actually happen? Are they biding their time for some perfect moment to unleash their madness? Or are they just waffling on all their threats of imminent violence because they got burnt after the failed insurrection of January 6th? I don't know. I guess we shall have to wait and see, as the Trumpster says himself. We shall have to wait and see. But let me tell you, friends, I take those kinds of threats seriously because, as some of you may be aware, from long before Trump, I have been quite concerned about the following issue. The system, and there is a system, capital T, capital S, system, the system profiteers on violence. And so it goes to great lengths to cultivate, promote, foment, and cause violence. The most absurd Trumptopian quote of the hour goes to Trump Jr., who apparently is reportedly said on his podcast, quote, "Well, guys, I guess I got some news. Apparently, Soros-backed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg is indicting my father." Let's be clear, folks. And this is the absurd part. This is communist level shit. This is stuff that would make Mao, Stalin, and Pol Pot blush. That's patently absurd, dear friends. Patently absurd. If this were truly that, then he would have been whisked away from the White House with a black bag over his head and never heard from again. 2.5 years ago. Bitter pill to swallow, friends. For those of you out there in America that continue to insist to cling to the Trumptopian cult of personality here, but they took their time. They did the due diligence, and they've afforded him all the rights that we expect to be afforded as citizens of these great United States of America under the rule of law. Now, I'm no blind faith adherent and believer that all laws are just and good. We must always be vigilant. We must always be aware, and we must always question and challenge absurd and redonkulous laws. But that is one thing, and the right-wing mentality of stripping away all laws is an entirely different thing, my friends. And this absurdity is beyond the pale. And the obnoxious part is that there is still a group of people out there that blindly believe this. The phrase and the imagery "banana republic" is trending hard today. But that's just like how when people who don't read the EULA complain that they're being stifled when they violate the EULA. Pin on the corkboard, dear friends. It's, as one meme puts it, it's easy to accuse anything and everything of being a conspiracy theory if you don't know how any of those things actually work. Of course, there are problematic issues. Corruption abounds. But as always, friends, I remind you, nothing is absolute. And no absolutist claim is ever absolutely true in either direction. So, I cannot bend the knee to Trump's paranoid ideology. Neither can I bend the knee to any of the Democrats' crazier insistences, but that's a whole nother episode. We will turn our attention to the problematic issues of both the Republican and Democratic parties once we have addressed the more intense concerns of this megalomaniac and his cult of personality that has attempted to hijack everything else. The biggest concern, as I've described in recent episodes, is the extremification of this country. Called it from the earliest of the early days. If there's one thing I felt highly certain of when Trump announced, is that no matter what else is going on in the realm of questionable political corruption and shenanigans, I felt extremely confident that Trump was being ushered into power in order to push this country's ideological pendulum as far to the right as possible and then let it snap back just to see what happens. I truly, genuinely, and a little sarcastically too, a little tongue-in-cheek poke and jab, snarkety snark, wink wink, nudge nudge, say no more, say no more. I truly do genuinely send my thoughts and prayers to those who have been hoodwinked. to those who have swallowed the Trumptopian Kool-Aid. Because this will be less than comfortable for them. And the tragedy is, of course, eventually, he will just fade from memory. But I pray that all those who did succumb to the delusion of the Trumptopian cult of personality, that they hopefully snap out of it. That they finally actually read the documentation provided. How many people did I ask during the first and second impeachment if they had bothered to read any of the documentation? Criticize the left all you want, friends, but they brought receipts. And that cannot be denied. Criticize the left and its issues all you want, and there are some issues, dear friends. We cannot blindly pretend that there are not. But Donald Trump was beyond the pale. And if any president who dabbled in criminality deserves to truly be held to account for and called out for hoisting himself up upon his own petard, it is this fine specimen of a manly man who does nothing but bitch and moan and whine and complain and hem and haw and point fingers. It's sad to think that anyone believes him to be the paragon of manhood. A real man, having committed the crimes Donald Trump committed, would grin and bear it and deal with this shit in a manlier way. But this guy's unhinged. I mean, just the wild swinging back and forth from just a few days ago praising the grand jury, because I think he bought into some of the Fox News malarkey, because just days before this indictment dropped, Fox was inaccurately reporting on its shows that the quote-unquote case was crumbling and that the AG would back down. Wah, wah, wah. Friendly reminder to all those who continue to watch Fox News, it is owned by foreigners. Started by a guy from Australia, I believe, and now currently owned by Middle Eastern bazillionaires. Now, I have no problem with either of the places these individuals come from, nor do I irrationally despise them based on their nations of origin. But, for a community obsessed with being quote-unquote true Americans, it is hilariously adorable that they have swallowed hook, line, and sinker the propaganda from a pseudo-news agency owned and operated by foreign moneyed interests. Isn't that what they're always accusing the left of being? Corrupted by foreign agents from disreputable nations that we don't like? Pins on the corkboard, friends. Pins on the corkboard. There's really not that much news to discuss here. Huzzah, he's been indicted. Great. Everything else is haymaking and jabberwockying, if I may turn a phrase. For those of you who do not know the Jabberwocky, you are missing out. What a delightful poem. But there will be, I'm sure, wave after wave after wave of right versus left and left versus right talking points thrown about, both on the media and in the socials. And I'm sure many of you out there will be reduced to name-calling in defense of the great orange political pundit. I almost called him a political puppet, but for whom, I don't know. But, he certainly, despite all the self-congratulations about Russiagate being a big dud, there was a bit of there. Much more so than any of the salacious accusations Trump has flung around at others. And then, of course, there's the whole Jared Kushner Middle East connection, which we can do a special episode on someday. And for all the rights accusing the left of being Satan worshipers, isn't it Donald Trump's son-in-law that owns the 666 building? How come they're not accusing him of being a Satan worshiper? What's up with that? The absurdity of the way in which the GOP and Donald Trump and the Trumptopified GOP loves to slander any and all who refuse to agree. That's like what chaps my hide. That's what really sticks in my craw, because they do it while simultaneously claiming to be the chosen ones of Christ. I've already done a whole episode about that, and I'm sure I'll have to talk about it again. But here we are, friends. We've come to one could say we have come full circle from the earliest of days of this half-ass con artist. Because, successful con artists get away with their cons. How many times has Trump been forced to give back money? How many times has Trump been called out for running a bogus malarkey scheme to bilk his supporters? To milk them for more than he's worth? Too often. And yet they continue to turn a blind eye, bend over backwards, and tie themselves up in knots to pretend that he is not just another shisty, shilly, greedy, corrupt, immoral, transactional, political monster that lives in the swamp they all claim to so desperately be trying to drain. I hope that with this sudden impact of real legal consequence, that they see him finally with open eyes for what he really is. A second-rate con man. That is my prayer and my thoughts that go out to them. And of course, I feel sorry, as I did in a whole special episode about, let us be kind to our brothers and sisters that have succumbed to this psychosis, because it is what it is. It's a cult of personality. They have put on Trump-colored tinfoil hats and sunglasses, and they have proceeded to divorce themselves from reality in order to maintain a delusional fantasy that this transactional, licentious, cheating, backstabbing, short-selling con artist of a political... I'm trying to find a nice alliteration that isn't the obvious puppet. But, that this guy is some Christ-chosen savior of white nationalist America? I mean, that right there is enough to be like, what on earth? What the F are you guys on? So let us join together, friends, for those of us who see things as they are. Let us join together in some deep thoughts and prayers for all those who will be suffering the growing pains and the bellyaches of all these bitter pills to come that they must swallow. Because however this particular indictment may or may not play out, there are quite a few more shoes yet to drop. And hopefully, the emoluments clause case doesn't just get forgotten and abandoned, because, I mean, that whole thing was just as egregious and obvious as this hush money situation. Let us hope and pray that the Trump base finally has their aha moment. Those who are still clinging to this buffoon of a would-be con man turned president. May they see how he has been the only one undermining himself the entire time. He is in the trouble he's getting himself into because of his own actions. Because of his own political incompetence. Because of his own inherent tendency towards criminality. And let us hope, dear friends, that once we finally get this chapter of American history over with, we can actually unite to solve the problems that we have created for ourselves, instead of this constant double-barrel, wedge-issue-driven echo chamber of pointing fingers and laying crazy accusations and waving weapons of mass murder around at each other. Because behind all of this hubbub, friends, there is the ongoing epidemic of exponentially growing occurrences of gun shootings, mass shooting situations. And although we've hit a new twist on the most recent one, the harsh, giant elephant in the room remains the same. Something I've been talking about forever. The system profiteers on violence. That is why the system and its Punch and Judy puppets spend so much time attempting to promote, foment, cause, propagate violence. Violence will not solve the problem. Violence will not rescue Trump. Violence will not end the corruption. So we must transcend those questions of violence in order to actually unite and functionally solve these problems that we have created for ourselves.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.